Hello, I hope you're doing well. Apologies for the absence. Here's a long overdue update for the Diablo and Dreamcast project. So the first order of business is how to get it to run on your Dreamcast, and you can do that by downloading the CDI file. This file includes the shareware version, so it has 2 levels, I think, and no boss fights at all, and a few more limitations. But if you have a full copy, you can inject it in this zip archive and create a CDI file that contains the full version. So here's how you can do that. You'll first have to download this. By the way, I'll put this URL in the description. I already did that, so we'll extract it. Okay. And now you will have to copy the diabdat.mpq file from your copy of Diablo to this directory. Let's see. Okay. And now, in order to package it into CDI, you'll need this tool. It's called mkdc disk. I don't have it on my operating system, but I did put it inside a Docker image. So here's how it works. It expects an ELF file, which you'll find in the zip archive, and you can specify the output file name, and then you will attach this data folder, because it contains the diabdat.mpq and other assets. If you want to build this tool locally, you can find instructions in the README file. And once that command finishes, you'll find the CDI file here. Now let's burn it and test it on a real Dreamcast. Apologies for the shaky footage. I was filming this with one hand. So the first thing you'll notice here is that there is no single player mode, only offline multiplayer. The reason is, as before, the single player save files are still too large. A regular VMU holds about 100 kilobytes. I experimented with the idea of storing the files in a RAM disk and then listing its contents to inspect the sizes. I noticed that each of the first 3 levels requires about 100 kilobytes of data. There are 17 of them in total, which is about 1.7 megabytes of data. That is orders of magnitude larger than what the VMU can hold. I found out that the multiplayer mode doesn't store as much data by design. It only stores the states of the player and the items, but the state of the levels is instead stored in a hash map, proving once again the superiority of the hash map data structure. Among the downsides of the multiplayer mode is that every now and then the game will save. So before I did this every 10 minutes, I actually did this every single minute, and I changed it to save every 10 minutes. It's still annoying, but it's better than before. It also saves when you switch levels, and for some reason when you drop an item from the inventory. Another downside is that every new game starts fresh and it doesn't know which quests you have completed in previous games. So that's something you need to watch out for. There's no sound yet, otherwise I wouldn't be yapping incessantly. I briefly tested it and ran into compilation error because of the underlying library. So it's called STL Audio Lib or something like that, and it uses keywords like and or not instead of the corresponding symbols. And for some reason these weren't supported when I tried to compile the game. Strangely enough, it did compile a single file that has these keywords. So I did this to isolate the problem, but I couldn't reproduce the issue that way, so I still don't know why it doesn't work. Eventually I got the game to compile by patching the source code of the library itself to replace the keywords with symbols. So after it compiled and it ran, and it did play sounds at the beginning, but I believe it was at the character selection screen again that it crashed because of an unrelated assertion. I haven't looked into it yet, but that's on the roadmap. The first time I ran the game on the console, it was crashing at the character selection screen. I didn't have access to the logs, so I had a few suspicions. I thought that it was because of how I was writing the files to the VMU. So I was using a combination of fread, fwrite, regular functions from the C standard, and then I added a custom header to store the file size in the first 4 bytes. The reason why is because of the workings of the VMU. So the VMU stores everything in blocks of 512 bytes, and I was afraid that the extra padding was corrupting the save files. But then I found out that GaliciaOS already has a family of functions that stores this information correctly. So there's a VMU package, I believe parse function that reads the file correctly from the VMU, and then there's a function that does the opposite operation. So it can store the file, and it also stores extra metadata like the size and the description, and also optionally you can add an icon. I ended up ordering an SD card adapter so that I could write the logs to it, and while waiting for it to ship I ended up displaying the critical logs I needed in message boxes and kept burning CDs like a caveman to narrow down the problem. Here's my stack of shame. I later found out that GaliciaOS can display logs on screen, and all it took was 2 lines of code. Not that it would have helped, because as it turns out, the whole thing was caused by this log line all along. I still don't know why, and frankly I don't want to know. I'm just glad those hear loss inducing days are behind me now. As far as performance is concerned, on Flycast the game was running at 50 FPS. On the Dreamcast though, it ran at something like 12 FPS, sometimes even dipping into the single digits. Thanks to GPF's SDL port, the game now runs at around 18 to 20 FPS, with a few frame drops here and there, especially if you turn on the minimap for some reason. On the town level it runs at 30 FPS. I haven't figured out how to use the analog stick yet. Even the trigger buttons were difficult for me to configure. I had to add another fdef line to the code. And when I did that, I ran into a bug where it was... So I was using the left trigger button to drink potions, and I ran into a bug where it was drinking multiple potions when you press the button. So once I figured out how the mechanics of this part works, that eliminated the bug, so now you can drink potions with the left and right trigger buttons, but still there's no analog stick support yet. And that's also on the roadmap. I should also mention that I'm not sure if the Dreamcast can withstand the lower levels of the labyrinth due to the RAM size limitations, so it only has 16 megabytes of RAM, and in theory the game requires 32 megabytes. On emulator I have managed to load the hell level, at least the first one, without crashing, but I still need to level up my character to play the game from A to Z in order to confirm if it's playable on the Dreamcast. To conclude this, I'll leave you with one of the most disturbing bugs I've encountered. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.